In the heart of the city, where glass towers scrape the clouds and luxury has its own language, there stood a restaurant unlike any other, the Sapphire Room. To most, it was a place of elegance. Crystal lights, velvet seats, music that whispered wealth, the kind of place where power came to dine. And pride came dressed in a suit, but behind the polished silver and perfect smiles. He had a story no one saw coming. A waitress, quiet, graceful, invisible to those who never looked twice, serving the rich, the loud, the proud. Yet under her calm eyes lived a truth that could silence the entire room, because sometimes the one you overlook isn't just another face in the crowd, she's the one who built the very world you're standing in. And tonight, one man's arrogance was about to meet its reckoning, not through anger, not through revenge, but through grace. This is the story of the Sapphire Room, where respect is the main course, and humility the sweetest dessert of all. In the heart of Chicago, under the glow of city lights, stood a restaurant known not just for its food, but for its heart. The Sapphire Room, a place where the rich came to dine and the humble came to serve every night. Its golden light spilled out onto the rain-soaked streets, drawing in people from every corner of the city. The proud, the tired, the lonely, and the lost. Inside, laughter mixed with the soft hum of jazz, and the scent of comfort and class filled the air. Among the servers moving quietly between the tables was Amara, a young black waitress whose calm smile never faded. Even on the hardest nights, there was a gentleness about her, a grace that didn't need attention to be seen. Her eyes carried stories, not of wealth or luxury, but of struggle, of hope, and of a strength that had been tested many times. The Sapphire Room wasn't just where she worked, it was where she healed, but that night, peace would be tested. The door swung open, and in walked a man whose presence instantly shifted the air. Gregory Hale, a businessman known for his sharp mind, deeper pockets, and the kind of arrogance that filled any room he entered. He walked in with a phone to his ear, barking orders, waving off the host without even a glance. The staff stiffened, whispers rippled, and the quiet rhythm of the restaurant faltered for a moment. Gregory didn't notice. He never noticed. He sat down at the center table, the best seat in the house, and ordered like a man used to being obeyed. Every word he spoke carried a bite. Sharp, dismissive, cutting. To him kindness was weakness, and respect was something others owed him. And when Amara approached, polite, gentle, professional. He didn't even look up. His tone was cold, his words careless, and as the evening went on, his arrogance grew louder than the music. He complained about the light, the temperature, the sound, the delay, and when his drink arrived a minute later than he expected, he let the entire restaurant hear his anger. The laughter faded, conversation stopped, forks paused mid-air. Everyone turned to look at Amara, standing silently, her eyes soft but steady. She didn't fight back. She didn't defend herself because she understood something he didn't. That respect isn't measured by money, and grace doesn't need to prove itself. The manager rushed in, trying to calm the situation, apologizing to Gregory, offering discounts and flattery to keep him satisfied. But Amara simply stepped back, quietly returning to her work, her dignity untouched. And while the guests returned to their meals, one man in the corner kept watching. He wasn't a customer. He was the restaurant's silent investor, a man who knew the truth about Amara, the truth no one else in that room could have imagined. Because Amara wasn't just a waitress. She was the owner, the Sapphire Room, the place that carried her name. Her recipes, her soul, existed because of her courage and her hard work. Years ago, she had built it from nothing, from a food truck to a dream, to one of Chicago's most loved restaurants, but tonight she had chosen to serve quietly, to see how people treated those they believed were beneath them, and Gregory Hale had shown exactly who he was. Later that night, as he bragged to his dinner guests about his success and wealth, the investor approached him with a polite smile. He thanked Gregory for visiting, then asked if he'd like to meet the owner. Gregory chuckled, proud, smug, unaware of what waited behind the kitchen doors. And then Amara stepped out, no tray, no apron, just calm confidence and quiet strength. The room froze. The same waitress he had insulted now stood before him as the true owner of everything around him. Whispers filled the air. Phones lifted, and pride melted from his face like ice under heat. The investor's voice carried through the silence. "Mr. Hale, meet Ms. Amara Johnson, founder and owner of the Sapphire Room." And in that moment, everything stopped. Gregory's arrogance cracked. His voice faltered. The man who believed respect was something money could buy finally learned what real class looked like. Amara didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply smiled, the same gentle smile she'd worn all night, and said softly, "In this place we serve respect before food." The crowd went quiet, and as Gregory left the restaurant in silence, his reflection in the glass reminded him of a truth he had long forgotten, that humility is the finest thing a person can wear, because money may open doors, but it's respect that keeps them open. That night the air shifted when a man walked in, Gregory Hale, a businessman with money in his pocket, arrogance in his walk, and emptiness in his eyes. The staff straightened up when they saw him, but Amara, she just smiled, the same way she smiled for everyone. The Sapphire Room gleamed under warm, golden light. Glasses clinked softly. Jazz hummed in the background. The smell of roasted herbs and melting butter filled the air. It was elegance at its finest, and Gregory believed he belonged at its center. He moved like a man used to being noticed. His suit was pressed to perfection, his watch gleamed like pride itself, and his expression told the world he was untouchable. But arrogance has a way of filling silence, and tonight it spoke louder than any music. He sat at the corner table, the one reserved for special guests. Without even glancing at the menu, he ordered, his tone sharp, his words cold, his presence unsettling. The servers around him moved quickly, careful not to make a single mistake. And Amara? She approached with calm grace, her tray balanced, her eyes soft, her spirit steady. To her, every guest deserved the same respect, even the ones who didn't return it. But Gregory wasn't the kind of man who saw kindness as strength. To him, service meant servitude, and when his glass wasn't filled fast enough, his voice sliced through the quiet like a blade. The restaurant froze. Every sound died, the jazz, the laughter, the rhythm of cutlery on porcelain. All eyes turned toward Amara, standing there calm and still like the eye of a storm. He accused her of neglect, of incompetence, of not knowing how to serve someone of his standards, but Amara didn't argue. She didn't flinch, because she knew. Storms don't last forever. Instead, she simply apologized, her voice steady and sincere. And with that same quiet dignity, she stepped back to give him space, but that only fed his anger. He mocked her smile, her patience, her grace, and yet she never broke. The others whispered, watching. Some pitied her, some admired her, because what they saw in that moment wasn't weakness. It was strength in its purest form, the strength to stay kind in the face of cruelty. Hours passed, and the restaurant slowly returned to rhythm. The storm outside mirrored the one inside, thunder rolling above the city as rain streaked across the windows. Gregory continued his meal, never realizing that his arrogance had revealed more about him than his wealth ever could. He didn't see how people looked at him now, not with respect, but disappointment. But one man did notice, a quiet figure seated in the corner, observing everything, the silent investor of the Sapphire Room, the only person in the room who knew who Amara truly was, because Amara wasn't just a waitress, she was the founder, the soul behind every brick, every dish, every note of music that filled that space. Years ago, she had started with nothing but a dream and a borrowed stove. Through sweat, tears, and relentless faith, she built this place, not for profit, but for purpose, a place where everyone, rich or poor, would be treated with dignity. And tonight, she chose to serve in silence, to see how people treated those they believed were beneath them. When the night finally ended, Gregory stood up proud and unbothered, still convinced of his superiority. But as he prepared to leave, The investor approached him and said, "Before you go, the owner would like to thank you personally." Gregory smiled smugly, expecting another man in a suit, someone of his status. Instead, Amara walked out from behind the kitchen door. No apron, no tray, just grace, confidence, and quiet power. The room went still. Every pair of eyes turned to her. Gregory's smirk faded. The arrogance drained from his face. The woman he had mocked stood before him, not as a servant, but as the owner of everything around him. And in that moment, he learned what true wealth looked like. Amara didn't need revenge. She didn't need to embarrass him. Her truth was enough. She simply smiled and said softly, "Here, we serve respect before food." The crowd stayed silent. But the message echoed far beyond those walls, because that night, everyone in the Sapphire Room witnessed something rare. That kindness isn't weakness. That humility shines brighter than gold, and that sometimes the richest soul in the room is the one who serves. He snapped his fingers, waved his hands, and treated those around him like furniture. Every word from his mouth dripped with disrespect, sharp enough to cut, loud enough to humiliate. But Amara didn't flinch. She took every insult with grace, like a soldier used to battle, not because she was weak, but because she had learned long ago that silence can be stronger than rage. The Sapphire Room glowed in the golden haze of city lights. Jazz played softly, glasses shimmered, and laughter tried to rise again. But the mood had shifted. Gregory Hale's arrogance filled every corner of the room, pushing away warmth, replacing it with tension. The waiters moved faster. The manager's smile grew tighter, and every guest pretended not to notice the storm brewing at the center table, but they all did. Everyone noticed. Gregory sat with confidence carved into every movement, the kind of confidence money buys, not respect. His voice rose over the music, commanding, criticizing, mocking. He complained about the service, the temperature, even the way Amara poured his drink. It wasn't about the food, it was about power, his need to feel above everyone else. And through it all, Amara stood steady, calm, focused. Her eyes didn't waver. Her voice never shook, because this wasn't the first time someone had mistaken her kindness for weakness. Behind that quiet smile was a heart that had fought harder battles. Nights spent cleaning tables long after the lights went out. Days spent building dreams that others said were impossible. Gregory's cruelty couldn't touch her spirit. It only revealed his own emptiness, and while he demanded attention, Amara's silence commanded respect. She moved with purpose, her steps soft but certain, like someone who knew exactly who she was. As the evening went on, Gregory's voice grew louder, his tone sharper. He wanted the room to hear him, to witness his dominance, but all he really did was expose the hollowness behind his pride. The guests exchanged quiet glances. The staff looked away, helpless and still. Amara refused to give him the satisfaction of reaction, because deep down, she knew something Gregory did not, that life has a way of humbling the proud. Near the bar, a man in a gray suit observed silently. He wasn't a customer. He was the silent investor, someone who knew the true story behind the Sapphire Room. He knew who Amara was and what she had built. Gregory's arrogance didn't surprise him. People like Gregory were everywhere, loud on the outside, lost on the inside, but he watched, curious, as Amara handled the moment with nothing but poise, because that, he knew, was real power, the kind that doesn't need to shout. As the night went on, rain began to fall outside. Raindrops tapped softly against the glass, echoing through the quiet restaurant. The music slowed. The air thickened, and when the check arrived, Gregory smirked, tossing bills onto the table like they were tokens of superiority. He left behind more than money. He left behind the echo of his arrogance and a silence heavy with unspoken truth. But that silence didn't last. Moments later, the man in the gray suit stood and walked toward him. He called Gregory back, politely, but firmly. "The owner would like a word," he said. Gregory turned, annoyed, expecting another servant desperate to please. Instead, he saw Amara, no tray, no apron, no smile meant to hide exhaustion, just quiet confidence. standing tall beneath the golden lights, and suddenly the room shifted again. Whispers filled the air. Phones stopped scrolling. Eyes widened as truth revealed itself. The woman Gregory had mocked wasn't just a waitress. She was the owner, the founder, the heart behind every meal and every melody in that room. The sapphire room, her creation, her dream, her legacy. Gregory's arrogance collapsed in an instant. All the money, the watch, the suit, none of it mattered now, because in that moment he stood small before the woman he tried to belittle. Amara didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. Her calm remained untouched, her dignity shining brighter than the chandeliers above. She looked at him once, not with anger, but with quiet compassion, and turned away. The lesson was simple. Respect can't be demanded. It's earned, and those who mistake kindness for weakness always learn too late that grace is a kind of strength money can never buy. When his drink arrived a minute late, he exploded. Voices fell silent. Heads turned in front of the entire restaurant. He yelled, mocked, and sneered, calling her names no one should ever hear. But Amara stood still, eyes steady, heart calm. The sapphire room, once filled with laughter and music, fell quiet. Even the soft jazz seemed to fade under the weight of his voice. Every pair of eyes in the room shifted toward the scene, toward the man with anger in his veins, and the woman who refused to be broken by it. Gregory Hale, a man who measured worth in money and power in the way others bowed before him. He believed the world owed him respect, simply because of what sat in his bank account. But respect, Amara knew, is not bought. It's earned. She looked at him, not with anger, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen worse storms and survived them all. To the guests, she looked small, a waitress standing before a man who could ruin her career with a single complaint. But inside, she was unshakable, because true strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to fight back to prove itself. It simply stands tall and waits for truth to speak. Gregory's voice echoed through the golden lights and glass walls. He insulted the service, the restaurant, even her voice. The staff froze. The manager rushed forward, but Amara raised a gentle hand, stopping him. She didn't need rescuing. The way she stood, calm, composed, unbothered, silenced more than his shouting ever could. And somewhere in that silence, something shifted. Guests began to whisper, not about Amara's mistake, but about Gregory's cruelty. People saw what arrogance looks like when it's stripped of charm. Ugly, loud, desperate. Amara quietly took the empty glass from his table and replaced it with another, her hands steady, no glare. No tears, just grace. Gregory didn't realize it, but in that moment he wasn't humiliating her. He was exposing himself, because the way you treat those who serve you says more about your character than your status ever could. The restaurant's energy shifted once more, not out of fear, but out of respect. Not for Gregory, but for the woman who had turned humiliation into composure. Behind the counter, the silent investor watched closely. His eyes softened with pride, because he knew who Amara truly was. The woman behind the sapphire room itself, the restaurant that bore her spirit, her recipes, her heart, her legacy built from nothing but faith and resilience. Years ago, she had been told she would never make it, that people like her weren't meant to build empires, and yet here she was, the hidden owner of the most beloved restaurant in Chicago, serving quietly to remind herself what humility feels like. And tonight, fate had handed her a lesson in disguise. Gregory Hale, a man blinded by privilege, had just shown everyone what happens when ego walks into a place built on grace. As the night moved forward, Gregory returned to his meal pretending nothing had happened. But the whispers lingered. The eyes followed. He was no longer the man commanding the room. He had become the example everyone hoped never to be. Amara continued her work, unbothered, carrying herself with that same gentle poise, because to her, dignity wasn't something the world gave. It was something you held on to, no matter how loud the world tried to shake it. And though he would never admit it, Gregory felt something that night he hadn't felt in years. Shame, not because he was caught, but because deep down he saw in her something he'd lost long ago. Peace, the kind of peace that money can't buy, the kind that comes from knowing who you are, even when others try to define you. As the last table emptied and the lights dimmed, Amara stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. The city outside was alive with noise, but inside she found stillness. She didn't think of revenge. She didn't wish for an apology. She simply hoped that maybe one day the man who yelled at her would understand the lesson the universe had just placed before him. Because some people learn through success, and others only through humiliation. And as Gregory's car disappeared into the dark, the quiet returned to the sapphire room, calm, gentle, whole again. Amara smiled faintly, whispering to herself the truth she lived by every day. Kindness may be tested, but it never loses, and with that she turned off the lights, leaving behind a room still glowing with grace. The restaurant manager rushed to step in, apologizing, offering free wine, bowing to Gregory's pride, but Amara simply said she was fine, because in her heart she knew people like him reveal more about themselves than the ones they insult. The sapphire room, usually filled with soft laughter and quiet elegance, had fallen into uneasy silence. The hum of conversation was gone, replaced by the heavy weight of judgment and discomfort. Gregory Hale sat back in his chair, his arrogance spreading through the room like smoke. He believed he had won, that his voice had power, but in truth, every word he spoke stripped away another layer of his dignity. He didn't realize that the more he tried to humiliate Amara, the smaller he became in the eyes of everyone watching. Amara, on the other hand, didn't fight back. She didn't defend herself. She stood tall, her hands steady, her breath calm, her silence louder than his shouting, because sometimes silence is not surrender, it's strength under control. The manager nervously poured another glass of wine. Hoping to calm the storm, Gregory waved him off with an impatient gesture, muttering complaints about poor service and incompetent staff. But what the crowd saw wasn't incompetence, it was composure, the awed kind of grace that only comes from someone who has been through worse and chosen peace over pride. Amara returned to her duties quietly, her smile unchanged, her spirit unshaken. The same woman he had tried to belittle now stood taller than ever, not in posture, but in presence. Because the truth about arrogance is simple. It burns fast, and it burns itself out. Across the room, a few guests exchanged looks. A young couple shook their heads. An older woman whispered softly, "She doesn't deserve that." And though Amara didn't hear the words, she felt their energy, silent support filling the space around her. Gregory continued his meal, still grumbling, still searching for something to complain about. But deep down, he was no longer angry at her. He was angry at what she represented: calmness, kindness, and control, things his wealth could never buy. Because the truth was simple. Gregory Hale had everything except peace. The more he talked, the more the room turned against him. The same people who once nodded to his name now saw through his act. A man shouting to cover the emptiness inside. Amara noticed none of it. She focused on her work, her rhythm soft and steady. Each plate she carried, each glass she filled, was an act of quiet resilience. And while Gregory's voice filled the air with noise, Amara filled it with grace. As the night went on, the rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the windows like a steady heartbeat. The music shifted to a slower tune, gentle piano notes echoing through the golden lights. Amara moved through the restaurant like a calm current in a restless sea, no bitterness in her heart, no anger in her eyes, only peace, hard-earned and deeply kept. Because she understood something most people never do. People like Gregory weren't born cruel. They were broken, and broken people often try to break others. But kindness, real kindness, is armor. And that night, her armor never cracked. The manager watched her from afar, quietly in awe. He'd seen many employees lose their temper under far less. But Amara was different. She carried herself like someone who had already faced life's storms. and learned that not every battle needs to be fought to be won. When the tension finally eased, the restaurant slowly came back to life. The clinking of silverware returned, whispers faded into laughter, and the music lifted once more. Gregory, oblivious to the shift, finished his wine and leaned back, still convinced he had made his point. But what he didn't realize was that the entire room had already judged him and found him lacking. The real victory belonged to Amara, not because she humiliated him, but because she refused to lose herself in his chaos. That night, every guest who had witnessed the moment left with a story, not of a rude customer, but of a woman who showed the world that grace is the most powerful response to cruelty. And as Amara walked past the window, rain glistening against the city lights, she whispered softly to herself, not in sadness, but in quiet truth. Some storms don't need thunder. Sometimes the calm is what changes the world, and with that she carried on, her calm, composed, undefeated. Unnoticed by everyone, a quiet man at the corner table watched it all. He wasn't a customer. He was the restaurant's new investor, and the only person in the room who knew Amara's truth, the truth that she wasn't just a waitress. She was the owner, the soul behind every detail of the Sapphire Room. From the golden light fixtures that shimmered across the walls, to the jazz that floated softly through the air, every inch of this place carried her fingerprint, her story, her heart, and yet she chose to serve, not out of necessity, but out of purpose, because Amara believed that leadership wasn't about standing above others, it was about understanding them. She wanted to feel the pulse of her dream up close, to hear the laughter, the footsteps, even the complaints, to stay human in a world that too easily forgets humility. The investor, Mr. Reynolds, watched quietly as Gregory Hale barked orders and Amara responded with kindness. He saw the patience in her eyes, the calm in her hands, and the strength in her silence. He knew this was more than good service, it was grace, the kind that comes from a soul that has seen both struggle and success, and learned that neither defines who you truly are. Gregory, however, remained blind to it all. He saw only what he wanted to see, a woman beneath him, someone to command, someone to look down on. But what he didn't know was that every insult, every cruel gesture, was being witnessed by the very people who held his reputation in their hands. Whispers began to ripple through the restaurant, subtle glances, quiet murmurs, the once admiring stares that followed. Gregory's expensive suit and polished watch were now filled with discomfort. The illusion of his power was fading fast. Amara continued, her work without faltering, each step, each word, each calm breath, a silent reminder that class has nothing to do with wealth. The investor smiled faintly to himself. He had met hundreds of business owners, but few carried such quiet strength. And as he watched Gregory's arrogance unfold, he made a silent decision, a test of character that would change everything. He called over the manager and whispered something only a few words long. The manager's eyes widened, but he nodded. Meanwhile, Gregory finished his meal, still surrounded by the heavy silence of judgment. He asked for the check, tossing a few bills on the table like trophies of entitlement. He stood up, straightened his tie, and prepared to leave, his pride still intact, unaware of the truth waiting to meet him. The investor rose from his seat and approached. The room seemed to pause, every head subtly turned as he extended a polite hand toward Gregory. In a calm tone, he said, "Before you leave, the owner would like to thank you personally." Gregory smirked, the kind of smirk only men use to control wear. He imagined another man in a suit, someone eager to please him, someone who shared his arrogance. But when the kitchen doors opened, silence fell again. It wasn't another man. It was Amara. No tray, no apron, just a woman standing tall, dignified. Radiant, unshaken, her calm was magnetic, her silence louder than any applause. The investor watched as realization flooded Gregory's face. The same woman he had mocked now stood before him as the owner of everything around him. The walls, the lights, the very table where he sat. His confidence cracked. His breath caught. pride gave way to disbelief. In that moment, every eye in the room saw the truth that wealth without humility is hollow, and respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. Elmira didn't need to say a word. She didn't need to defend herself or call attention to his behavior. Her presence alone was enough, because sometimes the loudest lesson is taught in silence. The investor smiled softly. This was the kind of strength money couldn't buy, the kind of leadership the world needed more of, and as Gregory lowered his gaze, the restaurant filled once again with the soft hum of music and conversation. Life returning, harmony restored. Amara turned to her staff with a gentle nod, her smile steady, her eyes bright with peace. The moment was over, but its meaning would linger. That night, the Sapphire Room didn't just serve food. It served a reminder that grace will always outshine arrogance, that kindness will always win over cruelty, and that true power lies not in how you are treated, but in how you choose to respond. Later that night, the noise of conversation and the clinking of glasses filled the Sapphire Room like a quiet storm. Gregory Hale sat at his table surrounded by clients and friends, men dressed in suits as sharp as their egos, women laughing politely at jokes that weren't funny. Gregory's voice carried across the room, confident, booming, the kind of voice that demanded attention. He bragged about his business empire, about the millions he'd made, the deals he'd crushed, the people who owed him their careers. To him, success wasn't about what you built. It was about who you could look down on from the top. Every boast came with a smirk, every word with a trace of pride too heavy to ignore. But across the room, sitting quietly, the investor watched. He had seen enough men like Gregory before, men who mistook arrogance for confidence and cruelty for strength. He sipped his drink, patient, calm, almost amused, as if he were waiting for the perfect moment to let the truth reveal itself. When Gregory's laughter hit its loudest, the investor stood and made his way over. His steps were slow, deliberate, the kind of walk that draws attention without needing to demand it. Gregory turned his head, his grin wide. "Ah, the investor," he said, raising his glass. The investor smiled back politely, but his tone carried a weight beneath its calm. He thanked Gregory for visiting, complimented his enthusiasm, and then asked, with a gentle nod, "Would you like to meet the owner?" Gregory leaned back in his chair, intrigued. Of course, he'd meet the owner. To him, it was another chance to display his importance, another handshake to add to his mental trophy case. "Sure," he said with a proud grin. "Always nice to meet the people running fine establishments like this." He straightened his jacket, adjusted his cufflinks, and leaned to his friends with a whisper, "Watch this. Maybe I'll give her a few tips on real management." The investor simply smiled. He turned toward the kitchen and gave a subtle nod to the manager standing nearby. The chatter dimmed. The restaurant's soft jazz seemed to slow. Even the waiters paused for a moment, sensing that something was about to happen. The kitchen doors swung open. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath, and then she appeared. Amara stepped out, not in her server's uniform, not with a tray or a towel, but in a simple black dress. Elegant yet modest, her posture was calm, her expression unshaken. Her presence alone silenced the room. Gregory's smirk faltered. For a moment, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe she had returned to apologize. But the way everyone looked at her told a different story. The investor spoke softly, but every word carried across the room. "Mr. Hale, meet Amara, the owner of the Sapphire Room." The color drained from Gregory's face. His hand froze midair, his glass trembling just slightly. Around him, whispers spread like wildfire, quiet gasps, stunned faces, disbelief turning into awe. The waitress he had insulted, humiliated, and mocked now stood before him as the very person he had tried to impress. His arrogance cracked. His voice caught somewhere between pride and panic. The weight of realization hit harder than any public humiliation could have. Amara didn't gloat. She didn't speak. She simply looked at him, not with anger, but with the quiet grace of someone who has already forgiven, the kind of look that pierces deeper than any words ever could. For the first time that night, Gregory had nothing to say. The restaurant that once echoed with his laughter now swallowed his silence whole. The investor gave a polite nod, thanking both of them, and returned to his table. Gregory slowly sat down, his confidence stripped bare, surrounded by people who no longer admired him, only pitied him. Amara turned away calmly, heading back toward the kitchen, not because she needed to hide, but because her work was done. The lesson had already been delivered, quietly, powerfully, and without cruelty. In that silence, Gregory learned something he never expected to. That respect cannot be bought. That dignity doesn't shout. It stands tall and lets the truth do the talking. And that night, as the glow of the restaurant lights reflected off the city windows, the Sapphire Room held more than fine dining. It held a story, one the guests would whisper about for years. A story about pride, humility, and the moment a man met the woman who reminded him what real power looks like. When Amara appeared, the room froze. The soft hum of jazz faded into silence. Forks stopped midair. Conversations died halfway through their words. Even the flicker of candlelight seemed to still, as if the world itself wanted to witness what came next. She walked in quietly, every step steady, every movement calm. There was no anger in her face, no triumph, no desire to humiliate, only quiet confidence, the kind that comes from truth standing in its full light. The same waitress Gregory had yelled at, mocked and belittled, now stood tall beside the investor, calm, confident, graceful. The transformation wasn't in her clothes. It was in the realization of who she had always been, the owner, the heart, the soul behind the Sapphire Room. Gregory blinked, disbelief flooding his face like a man waking from a bad dream. His smile faltered. His breath caught, and for the first time all night, his voice failed him. Around the room, whispers began to ripple, not cruel, but astonished. "That's her?" someone murmured. "The owner?" Another whispered back, and in those quiet ripples of realization, Gregory's image began to collapse. The powerful businessman who had strutted through the room now stood small, his pride dissolving beneath the weight of truth. He looked at Amara, eyes filled with confusion, shame, and something he hadn't felt in years, respect. His mouth opened, but no words came. None were needed, because sometimes silence is the only language left when your actions have already spoken loud enough. Amara didn't flinch. She didn't gloat. She just stood there, her gaze soft but steady, not as a conqueror, but as a teacher. The investor glanced between them, his expression calm, almost proud. He had seen this before, the moment when arrogance meets its reflection and realizes how small it really looks. Gregory's friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to look at him or her. The laughter that had once filled their table had turned to silence, the kind that humbles even the loudest rooms. Every person in that restaurant now saw Gregory for what he truly was, not a man of wealth, but a man of emptiness, and they saw Amara, not as a waitress, but as a woman of substance whose power came not from money or title, but from grace. She gave him a small, gentle nod, not out of pity, but out of closure, the kind of gesture that says, "You've done enough. The rest is for you to carry." Gregory lowered his gaze. His hands, once so sure, now trembled slightly as he set his glass down. For the first time, the sound of that glass touching the table echoed through the silence like thunder. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain, to make it right, but the words felt heavy, trapped behind the weight of his own pride. And so he said nothing, because deep down, he knew that no apology could erase what everyone had already seen. Amara turned slightly toward the investor, and with the same calm she had shown all evening, she thanked him, quietly, gracefully, and began to walk away. The sound of her heels on the polished floor carried through the room like a rhythm. Steady, poised, untouchable. As she disappeared behind the kitchen doors, a strange kind of peace filled the space she left behind. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning. It was about truth. Standing tall in silence, needing no defense, Gregory remained seated, still frozen in that same spot, eyes lowered to the tablecloth he had once felt so entitled to command. The investor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said nothing. Because some lessons don't need to be explained. They just need to be felt. Around them, the restaurant slowly came back to life. Music resumed, glasses clinked, laughter cautiously returned, but something had changed. The air felt lighter. The tone felt softer. The sapphire room had reclaimed its dignity, and as Gregory finally looked up, he realized that he hadn't just lost his temper that night. He had lost the illusion that money made him powerful. For power without respect is fragile, and respect, once lost, can't be bought back, only earned, slowly, painfully, through humility, that night. The sapphire room didn't just serve dinner, it served truth, a truth that silenced arrogance, elevated grace, and reminded everyone watching that kindness doesn't need to shout to be heard. It simply stands and lets the world listen. People whispered, phones recorded, and in that fragile silence, the sound of truth became deafening. The same crowd that once watched him mock her now saw him crumble beneath the weight of his own arrogance. Their eyes told the story, wide, stunned, unblinking, as if witnessing a man stripped bare of the image he'd built so carefully. The investor smiled gently, his calm presence cutting through the tension like a knife through still air. "Mr. Hale," he said softly, almost kindly, "meet Ms. Amara Johnson, the founder and owner of the Sapphire Room." The words hung in the air like a sentence too heavy to bear. Gregory froze. The color drained from his face, his proud posture collapsing inch by inch. His breath caught, shallow, uneven, like a man realizing the ground beneath him was never as solid as he believed. His hand twitched, as if to reach for something, an excuse, a defense, a way to undo what had been done. But nothing came. Around him, phones lifted discreetly, screens glowed, recording his downfall in quiet, merciless detail. The same audience that once laughed at his jokes now sat in reverent silence. Their admiration turned into quiet pity, pride. Broken ego shattered, Amara stood still, not as a victor, not as someone relishing the moment, but as a mirror reflecting his truth back at him. Her eyes were calm, steady, forgiving, the kind of look that doesn't humiliate, but humbles. Gregory tried to speak. His lips parted, but no words formed. What could he possibly say? Sorry? For what? For the insults, the cruelty, the way he treated kindness like weakness? Or for finally realizing that the woman he saw as beneath him was in every way above? The investor watched quietly, saying nothing more. He didn't need to. The moment had already spoken louder than any reprimand ever could. One of Gregory's associates shifted uneasily, lowering his gaze to his plate. Another slowly put away his phone, ashamed to be caught witnessing a man's pride unravel. But Gregory couldn't look away. He stared at Amara, the woman he had underestimated, insulted, and dismissed, now standing as the embodiment of everything he wasn't. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand respect. She simply existed in her truth, calm, grounded, untouchable, and that alone was enough to silence him. His chest rose and fell, each breath heavier than the last. It wasn't anger that filled him. It was realization, the kind that burns deeper than shame, the kind that changes you. The room remained still. Every eye followed her as she gave him one last look, not of triumph, but of quiet grace, and turned away. Her walk was slow, steady, dignified. The sound of her heels against the floor echoed in the silence like a heartbeat, rhythmic, calm. Gregory's reflection in the window caught his eye, a man he barely recognized. Gone was the power, the confidence, the illusion of control. What stared back was just a man, flawed, exposed, humbled. The investor took a slow sip of his drink, his expression thoughtful. Around him, conversations began to stir again, quietly, cautiously, as the restaurant came back to life. But for Gregory, the world had stopped moving. Pride had built his empire. But in that single moment, humility taught him more than success ever had. And as Amara disappeared behind the kitchen doors, the lesson lingered. Heavy, unspoken, unforgettable. Because the truth is, arrogance always looks powerful until it meets grace. And that night, under the soft lights of the sapphire room, everyone in that restaurant learned one thing: money can open doors, but only respect can keep them open. Amara didn't seek revenge. She didn't gloat. She simply smiled, that same gentle smile she'd worn all evening, calm, unbroken, timeless. Her words carried softly through the silence, wrapping the entire room in truth. "In this place," she said, "we serve respect before food." The line hung in the air like a whisper from something greater, not meant to wound, but to awaken. Every person in that restaurant felt it, not as a scolding, but as a reminder, a quiet truth they didn't know they needed to hear. Gregory stood still, his pride dissolving into something unfamiliar, not fear, not anger, but realization. The realization that he had mistaken wealth for worth and confidence for character. No one laughed now. No one whispered. The same people who had once applauded his arrogance now looked at him differently, not with admiration, but with understanding. They had seen the mask fall. Amara gave a small nod, then turned to the investor, thanking him with nothing more than a glance, a silent acknowledgement that grace had spoken louder than anger ever could. As she walked away, her presence left warmth in the air, a strange kind of peace. Born from quiet strength, Gregory exhaled slowly, like a man waking from a long dream. He looked around the room, at the faces that no longer mirrored his pride, at the world that suddenly felt heavier, quieter, truer. He placed his napkin down with trembling hands, straightened his tie, and without a word began to leave. His footsteps echoed softly on the marble floor, each one sounding less like retreat and more like reflection. As he reached the door, he paused, catching his own reflection in the glass. For a long moment, he just stared, not at his clothes, not at his watch, not at the image he'd spent years polishing, but at the man behind it all, tired, flawed, and humbled. The reflection didn't lie. It showed him the truth he had refused to see, that money could buy him a meal in the finest restaurant in Chicago, but it couldn't buy him the respect of the people serving it. That power might open doors, but only humility could keep them open, and that kindness, quiet, unshakable kindness, was worth more than every deal, every dollar, every ounce of pride he had ever owned. Outside, the city lights reflected off wet pavement, turning the street into a mirror of gold and rain. Gregory stepped into the night, the echo of her words still lingering in his mind. "We serve respect before food," they played over and over in his head, not like an insult, but like a prayer. The air was cold, the kind that stings your lungs but clears your thoughts. He walked without direction, just breathing, just thinking, really thinking, for the first time in years. Maybe this was the meal he needed all along, not a dinner of fine wine and perfection, but a serving of truth, bitter at first, but nourishing to the soul. He looked up at the night sky, a sky he'd stopped noticing long ago, and let out a small laugh, not of mockery, but of understanding. Some lessons come wrapped in silence, some arrive through humiliation, and some, the rare ones, are delivered by the kindness of the very people we once overlooked. That night, Gregory Hale walked away a different man. His empire still stood, his fortune untouched, but something inside had shifted. For the first time, he understood what real wealth looked like. It wasn't measured in zeros or signatures. It was measured in humanity, in how you treat those who serve you when the world isn't watching. And as he disappeared into the glow of the city lights, the reflection on the restaurant glass shimmered softly behind him, not showing the man he had been, but the man he might still become. Because sometimes it only takes one moment, one voice, one simple truth to change a life forever. And in the sapphire room that night, the richest thing on the menu was humility. And that night, as the city lights dimmed over Chicago, a man named Gregory Hale walked away with more than shame. He walked away changed. Because sometimes life doesn't humble us with failure. It humbles us with people. A simple waitress who never raised her voice, never fought back, taught him what all his success never could, that respect costs nothing, and yet means everything. In a world obsessed with power and pride, it's the quiet ones, the kind ones, who remind us what truly matters. So the next time you're served by someone, remember, you're not just being handed a plate, you're being handed a piece of someone's day, someone's effort, someone's heart. Because kindness, it's the only thing that never goes cold. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe for more real emotional stories. Stories that remind us that humanity still lives, even in the smallest moments. This was Billionaire Fires the Maid, but her little daughter's words change his life forever. Until next time, stay kind, stay human. Fa ba uro wa.